A decorated veteran returns from Afghanistan to find his entire life has been erased. Staff Sergeant Daniel Martinez survived an IED and 2 years of war only to learn his fiancée, Emma, believed he was dead and has married his cousin, Marcus. Veterans return from the dead, surviving betrayal and PTSD. Part 1, The Return. The C-130 descended through thick clouds over Joint Base Lewis McChord, and Staff Sergeant Daniel Martinez pressed his forehead against the cold window, watching Washington State materialize below like a half-remembered dream. 23 months, 700 days since he'd last seen American soil, since he'd last held Emma. The plane touched down with a shudder that traveled through Daniel's bones, or maybe that was just the constant tremor that had lived in his body since Kandahar, since the IED that had killed Corporal Jensen and Private Martinez, no relation, just another name on a list of the dead that played on repeat in Daniel's mind every night. "You good, Sarge?" Lopez asked from the seat beside him, young eyes old beyond their 22 years. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He wasn't good, hadn't been good since the explosion, since the 3 weeks in the German hospital, since the rehabilitation that had rebuilt his leg but left his mind in fragments. But he was home. Emma would make it better. Emma with her honey-colored hair and laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Emma, who'd written him letters every week for the first year, until the mail got spotty, until communications became unreliable. He'd only managed to send a handful of messages back. The last email he'd received from her was 6 months ago. "I love you. I'm waiting. Come home safe." The bus from base dropped him at the Greyhound station in Tacoma. Daniel shouldered his duffel bag, feeling the weight of everything he carried. Clothes, photos, medications he wasn't taking regularly enough, and all the invisible things that weighed so much more. The 3-hour ride to Bellingham should have felt short after 2 years deployed, but every mile stretched like taffy. Daniel kept his eyes closed, trying to picture Emma's face, their apartment on Holly Street, the coffee shop where they'd first met. But other images intruded. Jensen's body, the Afghan child who'd appeared from nowhere, the blood that had looked black in the dust. His hands shook. He pressed them between his knees. "Just hold on," he told himself. Emma's waiting. Part 2, The Discovery. The taxi dropped him at their apartment building at sunset. Golden light painted the brick facade the color of honey, the color of Emma's hair. Daniel's heart hammered as he climbed the stairs, muscle memory biding him to the 3rd floor, to the door marked 3C. He knocked, waited, knocked again. "Can I help you?" An elderly woman emerged from 3B. Mrs. Chen, their former neighbor. "Mrs. Chen, it's me." Daniel Martinez. The old woman's face went white. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No, you're dead." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What? No, I'm right here. I'm home. Is Emma inside?" Mrs. Chen backed toward her door, eyes wide with something between terror and pity. "Emma hasn't lived here for 8 months. Daniel, everyone thinks you're dead. There was a memorial service and everything." The floor tilted beneath Daniel's feet. "That's impossible. I'm not dead. Where's Emma? Where is she?" "She married your cousin, Marcus. They had a big wedding in March. I'm so sorry, but they said you were killed in action." The hallway narrowed to a tunnel. Daniel's ears filled with static, the same sound that had come right before the explosion. His leg ached where the shrapnel had torn through it. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Where?" His voice came from far away. "Where are they?" Mrs. Chen hesitated, then, "The estate on Chuckanut Drive, the big one overlooking the bay. But Daniel—" He was already moving, stumbling down the stairs, each step sending phantom pain shooting through his leg. Outside, the sunset had turned the color of blood. Part 3, The Confrontation. The estate sat behind iron gates, all glass and modern angles that screamed money. Daniel's cousin Marcus had always had money, old family wealth that Daniel's side of the Martinez family had never seen, a source of quiet resentment at family gatherings. But this was different. This was excessive. Daniel pressed the intercom button. Once, twice, 3 times. Yes? A man's voice, cultured and irritated. Marcus. It's Daniel. A long silence. Then, what kind of sick joke is this? Open the gate, Marcus. I'm not dead. 5 minutes later, Daniel stood in a living room that cost more than he'd earn in a decade. And there was Emma. She stood frozen by the piano, one hand braced against it, as though the instrument was the only thing keeping her upright. She was thinner than he remembered, her honey hair cut short in a sleek bob he didn't recognize. She wore a silk dress that probably cost what their old rent used to be. Danny? The word came out broken, barely audible. Surprise, he said, and hated how bitter it sounded. I'm not dead, after all. Emma swayed. Marcus, taller than Daniel remembered, wearing a cashmere sweater and an expression of absolute shock, rushed to her side. The gesture sent rage flooding through Daniel's chest. Don't touch her, he growled. I think you need to leave, Marcus said, recovering his composure with visible effort. You're clearly disturbed. The army notified us of your death. We have the paperwork. The army was wrong, Daniel's voice cracked. He pulled out his military ID, his dog tags, anything to prove he was real. I'm not a ghost. I'm right here. Emma, tell me you didn't know. Tell me you didn't think I was dead. Emma's face had gone the color of ash. They said the army sent officers. There was a casket. We buried you, Danny. We buried you. You buried an empty box. The rage was giving way to something worse, something that felt like drowning. How long did you wait, Emma? How long before you decided to forget me? That's enough. Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between Daniel and Emma in a protective gesture that made Daniel want to break something. Emma mourned you. We all did. She was devastated. I helped her through it. And yes, we fell in love. We fell in love, Daniel. That's not a crime. It's been less than 2 years. Daniel's hands were shaking intensely now. I was in a hospital in Germany. I was in rehabilitation. I was alive. And you were here playing house with my girl? Your girl? Emma's voice was stronger now, with an edge of anger. Danny, I thought you were dead. I cried every day for 6 months. I went to therapy. I tried to kill myself. The words stopped Daniel cold. Emma's eyes were wet, but she held his gaze. After they told me you were gone, I didn't want to be here anymore. Marcus found me. Marcus saved my life. And slowly, over months of grief counseling and healing, we found comfort in each other. I'm sorry you're alive. No, I don't mean it like that. I'm glad you're alive. But Danny, I'm married now. That's real. My marriage is real. Built on a lie, Daniel said quietly. Built on my death. Built on a mistake, Marcus corrected. A terrible, tragic mistake by the military. But Emma and I are married, legally married, and I'm asking you to leave now before I call the police. Daniel looked at Emma, really looked at her, searching for any sign of the woman he'd loved. The woman he'd thought about every day in the desert, every night when the mortars fell, every moment in the hospital when the pain was so bad he wanted to die. Had she ever really been his, or had he been in love with a dream the whole time? Did you love me? He asked. Did you ever really love me? Emma's face crumpled. Of course I did. I loved you so much it destroyed me when I thought you died. But Danny, that man is dead. The man I loved died over there. Even if his body survived, you're not the same person who left. She was right, and that truth cut deeper than any shrapnel. Daniel turned and walked out, each step an act of will. Behind him, he heard Emma sobbing and Marcus's low voice murmuring comfort. The sound followed him all the way to the gate, all the way down the long driveway, all the way into the night that swallowed him whole. Part 4. The Descent. Daniel spent that night on a bench in Maritime Heritage Park, watching the water and trying to remember why he'd fought so hard to survive. The pills in his duffel bag whispered promises, sleep without dreams, silence instead of Jensen's screams, peace instead of this hollowing pain. He took 2, then 4, then sat staring at the bottle, counting. 30 pills? Enough? His phone buzzed, a reminder he'd set 2 years ago. Emma's birthday tomorrow. Don't forget. He threw the phone into the bay and watched it sink. The next few weeks blurred together. Daniel rented a room in a motel off Guide Meridian, the kind of place where no one asked questions about the sounds that came from his room at night. He drank. The pills helped him sleep, but they couldn't stop the nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, covered in sweat, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. During the day, he walked, miles and miles through Bellingham streets, past the apartment he'd shared with Emma, past the coffee shop where they'd met, past the park where he'd proposed. The city was full of ghosts, not just of who he'd been, but of the life he'd thought he was coming home to. He tried to contact other friends, but the calls went unanswered. Word had spread that Daniel Martinez was alive, and no one knew what to say to a dead man walking. Or maybe they just believed Emma's assessment. The man they'd known had died over there. This stranger wearing his face wasn't welcome at the wake. One night, drunk and furious, Daniel found himself outside Marcus's gates again. He pressed the intercom button repeatedly, screaming Emma's name until security arrived. He spent the night in jail for disturbing the peace. Marcus didn't press charges, an act of mercy that felt more like pity. The VA called. Daniel ignored them. His mom called from Arizona. He let it go to voicemail. His little sister texted, "Please let me know you're okay." He didn't respond. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. Part 5. Rock Bottom. It was a Tuesday when Daniel hit bottom, though he wouldn't remember that detail clearly. The days had bled together into one continuous nightmare of insomnia, rage, and grief. He'd been drinking since morning, cheap whiskey from the liquor store down the street. The motel room was a disaster, empty bottles, unwashed clothes, the gun he'd bought at a pawn shop sitting on the nightstand like a period at the end of an unfinished sentence. He kept thinking about Emma's words. The man I loved died over there. Maybe she was right. Maybe Daniel Martinez had died in that explosion, and this broken thing that came home was just a ghost who didn't know it was dead yet. He picked up the gun, checked that it was loaded, put it back down, picked it up again. His hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in weeks, they were steady. The knock on the door made him jump, nearly dropping the weapon. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, my name is Robert Chen. I'm with the Veterans Outreach Program." Daniel said nothing, barely breathing. "I know you're in there, son. Mrs. Chen, my mother, she asked me to check on you. She's worried. Said you came home to find your world turned upside down. Go away. Can't do that. My mom is terrifying when she's worried. If I don't at least talk to you, she'll come down here herself. And trust me, you don't want that." Despite everything, Daniel felt a ghost of a smile. Mrs. Chen was terrifying. "Look," Robert continued through the door, "I'm not here to fix you. Can't be done. I know because I'm broken too. Did 2 tours in Iraq. Came home to find my wife had cleaned out the bank account and moved to California with my best friend. Spent 6 months planning to eat my gun. So I get it." Daniel's finger moved away from the trigger. "There's a meeting tonight," Robert said. "VFW Hall on Cornwall. Just guys like us, telling stories, drinking bad coffee, no speeches, no therapy bullshit. Just people who understand. 7 o'clock. I hope you'll come." Footsteps retreated down the walkway. Daniel sat holding the gun for another hour. Then he put it in the drawer, washed his face for the first time in days, and at 6, he walked out into the cool evening air. Part 6. The Circle. The VFW hall smelled like coffee and old cigarette smoke. A dozen folding chairs formed a circle. most of them occupied by men and women in various states of weariness.
I love making these videos for you. If you liked this story, then please like, subscribe to my channel, and switch on the notifications for more entertaining stories. Please also leave a comment for any story suggestions.
Daniel recognized the look, the 1,000-yard stare, the constant vigilance, the weight of carrying too much. Robert Chen stood by the coffee maker, a stocky man in his 40s with graying temples and kind eyes. He nodded when Daniel entered, but didn't make a big deal of it, just gestured to an empty chair. "All right, everyone's here," Robert said, settling into his own seat. "Let's get started. For our newcomers, I'm Robert, Army, Iraq, 05 to 07. This is a judgment-free zone. What's said here stays here. We're all fighting the same war, the one that didn't end when we came home." They went around the circle. Daniel learned that the woman with the prosthetic leg was Sarah, Marines, who'd lost her limb and her fiancé in the same IED attack. The kid who looked barely 20 was Tyler, Army, whose best friend had committed suicide the week after they got stateside. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Survival wasn't the end of the war. When it came to Daniel's turn, the words stuck in his throat. "I'm Daniel, Army, Afghanistan. I came home and..." He stopped, breathing hard. "I came home and I don't exist anymore. The person I was is dead, and I don't know who I'm supposed to be now." "Yeah," said a man across the circle. Tom, Navy, Vietnam era. "That's the bitch of it, isn't it? They send you to war, but they never teach you how to be human again." The meeting lasted 2 hours. They talked about nightmares and triggers, about feeling like aliens in their own country, about the friends they'd lost and the futures that felt impossible. And somehow, in that circle of broken people, Daniel felt less shattered. Afterward, as people were leaving, a woman approached him. She was around his age, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that had seen too much. "Hey," she said, "I'm Jessica. I run a support group specifically for veterans dealing with relationship issues after deployment. Robert mentioned you might benefit. It meets Thursday nights, same place." Daniel hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Nobody's ever ready. But the alternative is what? Going back to that motel room and finishing what you were planning when Robert knocked? She said it matter-of-factly, without judgment, and somehow that made it okay. "How did you know?" Jessica smiled sadly. "Because I've been there. Because we've all been there. The question isn't whether you hit rock bottom, it's whether you're willing to start climbing back up." Daniel thought about the gun in his drawer, about Emma's face when she said he was dead, about the endless, empty days stretching ahead. "Thursday," he said, finally. "I'll be here." Part 7. The Healing. The first month was harsh. Daniel attended meetings 3 times a week, Robert's general group on Tuesdays, Jessica's relationship-focused group on Thursdays, and a new PTSD-specific session on Saturdays. He started seeing a VA therapist, a woman named Dr. Patel, who didn't flinch when he described his darkest thoughts. He got a job doing construction, physical work that tired him out enough to sleep some nights. He moved out of the motel into a studio apartment, small but clean. He threw away the gun, taking it to a police buyback program and walking out with $200 and something that felt almost like relief. But the work was hard. The nightmares persisted. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the weight of everything crushed him flat. In group, he talked about Emma, about the betrayal that felt worse than the enemy fire, about coming home to find he'd been erased. "The thing is," Tom said one Tuesday, "you can't control what happened. She thought you were dead. Sounds like she mourned you real. Your cousin didn't steal her, he comforted a grieving woman. Is it fucked up? Yeah, but it's not the same as if she'd cheated while you were deployed." "Doesn't make it hurt less," Daniel said. "No," Sarah agreed, "but it means the anger doesn't have anywhere to go, and anger without a target just turns inward and becomes poison." "So what am I supposed to do with it?" Jessica, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "You're supposed to feel it, sit with it, let it move through you instead of trying to hold it or fight it. Grief and anger are like water, they'll find a way out eventually. You can either let them flow or you can dam them up until the pressure breaks you. Over time, Daniel learned to feel without shattering. He learned that healing wasn't linear. There were good days and terrible days, and days that were both. He learned that PTSD wasn't something he'd get over, but something he could learn to live with. He started opening up more in groups, and people responded. The newer veterans, the ones still raw and bleeding, gravitated to him. He had a way of talking about the darkness that made it feel survivable. "You should get certified," Robert said after one particularly good meeting, "as a peer support specialist. You've got a gift for this." "I'm barely holding myself together," Daniel protested. "That's exactly why you'd be good at it. The people who've been where you are don't need someone who's got it all figured out. They need someone who understands the struggle." Daniel thought about it, about finding purpose in the pain, about turning his worst experiences into something that might help someone else. "Tell me more," he said. Part 8, The Transformation. It took 6 months, but Daniel completed the certification program to become a peer support specialist. The training was intense, 50 hours of learning how to help others while maintaining boundaries, how to recognize crisis situations, how to share his story without re-traumatizing himself. Jessica was one of his instructors. He learned that she'd done 3 tours in Iraq, come home to find her husband in bed with another woman, and spent 2 years in a dark place before finding her way to advocacy work. She'd been running veteran support groups for 5 years now, and her tough love approach had saved lives. "The thing about rock bottom," she told the certification class, "is that it's also a foundation. You can't build down from there, you can only build up." Daniel started leading a support group of his own, specifically for veterans dealing with complicated homecomings. The first session, 6 people showed up. Within 3 months, there were 15 regulars. He still had bad days, still woke up screaming sometimes, still felt phantom pain in his leg. But the work gave him purpose, and purpose made the pain bearable. He saw Emma twice during that period, both times by accident. The first was at the grocery store. They made eye contact across the produce section, and Emma looked like she might approach, but Daniel turned away. He wasn't ready. The second time was at a coffee shop. Emma was with Marcus, and Daniel watched through the window as his cousin held doors, pulled out chairs, played the attentive husband. Emma smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Daniel felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, just a distant recognition of a life that might have been his in another timeline. He was moving on. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. Part 9. The Connection. It started small. Conversations after group meetings, coffee runs before sessions, text messages about veteran resources. Daniel and Jessica developed an easy friendship built on shared understanding. They'd both been to the edge and back. They spoke the same language. "You ever think about dating again?" Jessica asked one evening after a particularly emotional group session. They were sitting in her car in the VFW parking lot, neither quite ready to go home. "Not really," Daniel admitted. "Feels like I'm still married in some weird way. Like I need Emma's permission to move on, even though she's the one who got married." "That's trauma logic. You know that, right?" "Knowing it doesn't make it feel less real." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "I get it. After my divorce, I convinced myself I was happier alone, that relationships were just potential landmines. Took me 3 years to realize I wasn't being strong. I was being scared." "Are you still scared?" "Terrified," she said with a laugh. "But I'm trying to be terrified and open at the same time. It's a hell of a balance." They started spending more time together outside of group settings, hiking in Larrabee State Park, where the trails were empty enough that they didn't have to worry about crowds triggering their hypervigilance. Dinner at quiet restaurants where they could sit with their backs to walls. Movies at the late-night showings when theaters were nearly empty. It wasn't dating, they told themselves. It was just two friends who understood each other's particular brand of broken. But then came the night after a veteran they'd both been working with, a young Marine named Chris, committed suicide. They'd seen the signs, had gotten him into treatment, thought they were making progress, and then he was gone. Daniel fell apart. He locked himself in his apartment, ignoring calls and messages, drowning in guilt and rage, and the terrible certainty that nothing he did mattered. Jessica showed up at 2 a.m. She didn't knock, just used the key he'd given her for emergencies, and found him on the bathroom floor, surrounded by empty bottles, but not yet drunk enough to forget. She sat down beside him, didn't try to fix anything, just sat there in the dark, her shoulder pressed against his, two broken people holding each other up. "It's not your fault," she said eventually. "I should have seen it." "You did see it. You tried. Sometimes the demons win anyway." Daniel's hands were shaking again, the tremor he'd almost learned to control. Jessica took his hand, held it steady in both of hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not leaving me alone with this." "I never will," she said, and in that moment, sitting on a bathroom floor at 2 a.m., mourning a man they couldn't save, something shifted between them. Part 10. The Reckoning. Life continued its messy forward progress. Daniel and Jessica stopped pretending they were just friends. Their relationship was complicated, full of triggers and boundaries and honest conversations about what they could and couldn't handle. But it was real in a way nothing had been since Afghanistan. Then, 10 months after Daniel's return from the dead, the news broke. Marcus Martinez arrested for wire fraud, grand-scale embezzlement. The estate on Chuckanut Drive, purchased with stolen money. The investment firm he'd claimed to run, a Ponzi scheme that had defrauded dozens of elderly clients of their retirement savings. Daniel heard it first from Robert, who'd seen the news and called immediately. "Your cousin's going down," Robert said. "It's all over the local news. Apparently the FBI's been investigating for months." Daniel felt empty. Not vindicated, not satisfied, just tired. Jessica found him sitting on his couch, staring at his phone. "You okay?" "Emma's married to a criminal. The money, the estate, everything she chose over me, it was all fake." "Are you going to call her?" Daniel thought about it. About the girl he'd loved, the woman who'd mourned him, the stranger in the silk dress who'd told him the man he'd been was dead. "No," he said finally. "That's her path to walk. Mine is here." But Emma called him. Her voice was raw, scraped clean of any pride. "Danny, I don't have the right to ask you anything, but I don't know where else to turn. Marcus is going to prison. The FBI seized everything. I'm facing charges as an accessory because some of the money went through accounts in my name. My lawyer says I might do time." "Did you know?" Daniel asked, "about the fraud?" "No, I swear, Danny, I thought it was family money. I thought—" She broke down crying. "I thought I'd found safety, security, and it was all a lie." "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "That's a hell of a thing, isn't it? Finding out the life you thought you had was built on nothing." "I'm sorry for everything. You were right to hate me." "I don't hate you, Emma. I don't feel much of anything about you anymore, and maybe that's worse. You made choices. Some of them hurt me. But I've been where you are, having my whole world collapse. It's survivable. Barely, but it is." How? How do I survive this?" Daniel thought about the gun in his drawer, the pills he'd counted, the night Robert Chen knocked on his door. You find people who understand, he said. You tell the truth, even when it hurts. You get up every day, even when you don't want to. You build something new from the wreckage. I don't know if I can. You can, Jessica said, taking the phone from Daniel. Emma, my name is Jessica. I run support groups for people coming out of trauma. I'm going to text you some information. If you want help, it's there. If you don't, that's your choice. But you're not alone unless you choose to be. She hung up and handed the phone back to Daniel. Thank you, he said. For what? For being better than me. For seeing her as a person who needs help instead of just someone who hurt me. Jessica kissed his forehead. We're all just people who need help, Daniel. Some of us are just further along in asking for it. Part 11, The Trial. Marcus's trial was a spectacle. Daniel didn't attend, but he followed the news. The testimony painted a picture of systematic fraud. Older clients convinced to invest their life savings in schemes that never existed. Elaborate paperwork covering up the theft. Money funneled through offshore accounts. Emma testified. The prosecution had offered her immunity in exchange for cooperation, and she'd taken it. She hadn't known about the fraud, but she'd signed papers, had been the face of some of Marcus's charitable organizations that existed only to launder money. Marcus got 15 years. The judge was particularly harsh, noting that he'd exploited vulnerable retirees and shown no remorse. The money was mostly gone, spent on real estate, cars, a lifestyle that required constant infusions of stolen cash to maintain. Emma lost everything. The house was seized, the wedding jewelry, the designer clothes, all of it liquidated to partially compensate Marcus's victims. She moved into a studio apartment in Fairhaven, found work as a waitress, and started attending Jessica's support group. Daniel saw her there 3 weeks after the sentencing. She sat across the circle, thinner than ever, her eyes hollow. When it was her turn to speak, she talked about how she'd mistaken security for love, how she'd been so desperate to fill the hole Daniel's death left that she'd ignored every red flag. I thought grief was the worst thing I'd ever feel, she said, but this, knowing I let myself be used, knowing I'm part of the reason people lost everything, this is worse. At least grief was honest. After the meeting, she approached Daniel hesitantly. Thank you, she said, for telling me to get help, for not wanting me to suffer even after everything. I don't want anyone to suffer, Daniel said simply. I've done enough of that for everybody. Emma nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks. You're different, stronger. I don't know if that makes sense, but you are. I'm not stronger. I'm just still standing. Some days that's the best any of us can do. Can I ask you something? Did you ever forgive me? Daniel considered the question. Beside him, Jessica's hand found his. I'm working on it, he said honestly. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's something you have to choose over and over again. Some days I manage it, some days I don't. But I'm trying, and trying counts for something. Emma smiled sadly. The man I loved really did die over there, but the man who came back is someone I could learn from. She walked away, and Daniel didn't watch her go. That chapter of his life was closed, not forgotten, but no longer the story defining him. Part 12, The Future. A year later, Daniel stood in front of a room full of veterans at the VFW hall. It was the anniversary of the first meeting he'd attended, the night Robert Chen had likely saved his life. My name is Daniel Martinez, he said. Army, Afghanistan. I came home dead, or at least everyone thought so. Found out my girlfriend had married my cousin, thought I'd lost everything worth living for. Around the circle, heads nodded. They understood. I'm not going to tell you it gets easier. Some days it doesn't. Some days the weight of everything feels exactly as heavy as it did that first night. But I will tell you this. You can survive it. You can build a life from the wreckage. It won't be the life you planned, but it can still be good. It can still be worth living. After the meeting, new veterans approached him with questions. Daniel answered them with patience he'd learned the hard way, sharing resources and phone numbers and the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd been to the edge. Jessica waited for him, keys in hand. They were moving in together next week, a small house with a yard for the dog they were planning to adopt. It was terrifying and exciting and felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, but this time with someone to hold on to. "Ready?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said, taking her hand. "I'm ready." They walked out into the cool evening, past the parking lot where Daniel had once sat in Robert's car and decided to live, past the street where he'd once stumbled, drunk and broken, into a future he couldn't have imagined a year ago. The nightmares still came sometimes. His hands still shook on bad days. The ghost of who he'd been before the war sometimes haunted him, but he'd learned to live with the ghosts, to carry his scars without letting them carry him. Emma continued attending meetings, rebuilding her life one painful day at a time. They'd become something like friends, united by their shared understanding of loss and recovery. She was dating someone new, a high school teacher who drove a Honda and made her laugh. Simple things, but real. Marcus wrote letters from prison. Daniel burned them unread. Some forgiveness was a bridge too far, and that was okay too. Robert told Daniel he was proud of him, that he'd become the kind of peer counselor who saved lives. Daniel deflected the compliment, but at night, alone with his thoughts, he let himself believe it might be true. 6 months later, Daniel stood in front of a classroom at the community college, teaching a course on peer support for veterans. 15 students, all of them with military backgrounds, all of them seeking to turn their pain into purpose. "Trauma doesn't define you," he told them, "but it does change you. The question is whether you let it break you or whether you use the broken pieces to build something new. There's no shame in being broken. The shame is in refusing to let anyone help you heal." His phone buzzed during a break. A text from a veteran he'd been working with. "Made it through another day. Thank you." Daniel typed back, "Proud of you. Keep going." Because that's what they did. They kept going. They held each other up on the bad days and celebrated the good ones. They built community from shared suffering and purpose from pain. Jessica met him after class. They drove to the waterfront, watching ferries cross the bay. "I've been thinking," Jessica said, "about starting a nonprofit, expanding the support groups, maybe getting funding for a veterans center. Nothing fancy, just a space where people can come and not feel alone." "That sounds perfect," Daniel said. "Count me in." "Yeah? Yeah, I'm all in." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset over the water. Daniel thought about the boy he'd been when he enlisted, full of patriotism and naive certainty. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who knew how dark the world could be, how fragile everything was, how much courage it took just to keep breathing some days. But he was here. He was alive. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, he was learning to live again. His phone buzzed again, another veteran checking in. Then another. A small community of broken people holding each other together, refusing to let the darkness win. Daniel answered each message with care, with honesty, with the hard-won knowledge that surviving wasn't the same as living, but it was the necessary first step. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky the color of hope. "I love you," Jessica said quietly. "I love you too." Simple words, but they meant everything. They meant choosing to be vulnerable again. They meant trusting someone with the broken parts. They meant believing in a future when the past kept trying to drag you under. They drove home through streets that no longer felt haunted. The ghosts were still there, Jensen and Emma and the man Daniel used to be, but they were quieter now, less insistent. In the house they shared, Daniel opened his laptop and wrote an email to the VA, proposing a new peer support initiative. Jessica reviewed grant applications for the nonprofit. Together, they built something meaningful from the ruins of their former lives. Late that night, the nightmare came. Daniel woke up gasping, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, his heart pounding with adrenaline. Jessica was there, holding him, grounding him. "You're home," she whispered. "You're safe. You're here." Daniel's breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped. The present reasserted itself over the past. "I'm here," he repeated. "You're here," she confirmed. And he was. Broken but healing, scarred but standing, dead but somehow miraculously alive. In the morning, he would get up and help other veterans find their way home. But for now, he lay in the dark, held by someone who understood, and let himself believe that surviving was enough, that living was possible, that even ghosts could find their way back to the light. The end.
I love making these videos for you. If you liked this story, then please like, subscribe to my channel, and switch on the notifications for more entertaining stories. Please also leave a comment for any story suggestions.